When I was at university, I got involved in all sorts of student societies. On Mondays, I used to attend left lunch when, over soup and sandwiches, we discussed earnestly how we were going to make society better. And at the Catholic chaplaincy, I was an active member of the Handicapped Children's Visiting Group. I used to accompany Matthew, who had Downs, to the swimming pool on Saturday afternoons, something that I really enjoyed. And I was also a member of the Student Life Group. And I recall this especially today because it's the 52nd anniversary of the coming into effect of the Abortion Act. Although we met in the Catholic chaplaincy, we made it clear that we were an open, not a confessional group. This was important because people back then, as now, like to dismiss the pro-life movement as being the preserve of, as they see as, illiberal Catholics who are trying to foist our morality upon everybody else. I think, in fact, we were all Catholics, apart from one truly admirable young man who was studying science and who, like me, dressed a little scruffily, and who also, like me, and perhaps this was down to the way that he and I dressed, didn't have a girlfriend. He was a professed atheist, and I think we were all secretly glad about this, because that lent credibility to us in the world of secular student politics. Tom just couldn't understand how any sensible person could possibly believe in a creator whom one couldn't see. He was an exponent of that scientific culture which has become increasingly prevalent since our meetings in the 1980s, which assumes that natural science should have the last word about everything. Even back then I remember thinking, yeah, but the most important things aren't explained by science, such as why do I keep falling in love every other month with an unobtainable young woman, or how is it that I experience such exaltation at the dawn when I'm rowing on the river in a boat with 7 other young men? But I never voiced my thoughts because he was so clever. Where Tom's worldview was politically advantageous was that he applied similar scorn to the arguments of those who held that a baby in a mother's womb could be considered in some way as being pre-human, and therefore as possessing less value than the rest of us, or indeed no value at all. How could a human being whose genetic code, I'd not heard of genetic codes before this, but as he said, was unique and unrepeatable, who was evidently a separate entity from its mother and father, and whose development after conception did not include any moment of radical discontinuity, such that one could say at a particular moment in the process of gestation, a human person had magically come into existence who formerly didn't exist. How could one say that such a being could not be granted full human rights like the rest of us? Even if, he conceded, for he was a true scientist, some discovery about human development in the womb should be made in the future which demonstrated that human personhood began at, say, day 43 of the process of gestation. And you could tell as he spoke that he thought the chance of such a discovery was about 0. The very fact that all the scientific evidence currently pointed to a real human person existing when the new being is just a cluster of multiplying cells, that in itself is more than reason enough for us to oppose all forms of abortion. Right on, Tom, I used to think. He was a true humanitarian and one who burned with a passion for the truth. I was so moved by Tom's and others' comments with regard to the welfare of babies in the womb that on this anniversary in 1984, I remember, I organised a protest against the Abortion Act in the centre of the town where I was studying. I had a big bass drum from the music department, strapped it over my shoulders, and I and some others, bearing placards, only a few of them, not many of the group actually turned up, marched through crowds of shoppers one Saturday afternoon. I wanted not merely to talk about this issue, I thought it was so important I wanted to challenge people's indifference to it. I didn't perceive then what I recognise now, namely that it was my own indifference that especially alarmed me. Over the years since then, I have continued to support the pro-life movement. I've always donated part of my Christmas offerings to the estimable charity Life, which provides accommodation to young women who have become unexpectedly pregnant. I've twice prayed outside abortion clinics, which I've done, and I wish I'd done so more often, although I feel desperately self-conscious when I do so. And then a couple of years ago, I was seized once again with the determination to make my desire for reform more public. I hired a minibus and a gang of us, including the whole Bradford cohort of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, headed down to Birmingham for the annual pro-life march. What struck me immediately was how vicious the atmosphere was. Vast ranks of young political activists, whose ideas had no doubt been honed in the modern equivalent of left lunch, barracked every speaker and largely successfully tried to drown out everything that was said from the podium or on the screen through using multiple loudspeakers and other noise-making devices. They were very organised, and they forced our protest march to grind to a halt while the police on the ground sought to get reinforcements. During this halt, a lot of young women, supported by some young men, stood in a line in front of me, very close to me. I think they felt delighted to seize on a real priest, because there aren't many of us around these days. And they screamed again and again and again, their spittle flying all over the place. "Shame on you! Shame on you!" pointing aggressively at me and gesticulating wildly. It was magnificent. Driving back in the minibus, I thought of that phrase, "shame on you." Parents say it to their children, "You haven't done your homework yet," as they cajole them to try and be better. But sometimes, when we reach adulthood, we feel overcome by shame. It envelops us. We long for some way of starting again, but that seems impossible to us. So we become lost in anger and self-hatred. If only, we think, somebody could take our shame upon themselves and free us from it.